Coming up on the Unpack Show.
When we are kids, or when we were kids, those were our developmental stages. And the most closest people to us were our caregivers or parents. And the way these people treated us or related with us determined who we became.
Hello and welcome to the Unpack Show podcast with myself, Johannes Baloyi. Thank you for joining me for yet another amazing episode. And above all, I want to thank you for always choosing us to inspire you with life-changing stories. Friends, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you can be notified when we release a new episode. And speaking of life-changing stories, dealing with the past pains can be so difficult, and there are many things we have experienced growing up, most of which are negative things that we have learned and accumulated from growing up in an unhealthy or an unstable family background. And those negative things can influence us to develop a behavior that sabotages the things we have and also destroying our lives. And today on the podcast, we are joined by our guest, Chris Chambiwa. Chris Chambiwa is the author of Positioning Yourself and Inspired Pain. And he's also a certified behavioral coach and a relationship therapist. And right now, he's working on an amazing project of his third book that will be coming out this year in 2022. Chris, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Saito, and it's good to be here. I really appreciate you having me here.
Thanks for making the time to be with us here. Did I pronounce your second name correctly? Chambiwa.
You did an amazing job, believe me. I struggle with names myself. You did an amazing job.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So Chris, your work, it's so amazing. I've followed you for a very long time on your social media platforms, like most especially on TikTok, because of it's where you post, where you share most of your work. And I remember last night I was reading this phenomenal blog that you wrote on Medium platform. It's an article, and you were talking about generational trauma. And I found that to be something that many of us, we go through generational trauma, but at the very same time, we don't know that we are going through generational trauma, but our behavior, it shows. And for someone like you, you can when you observe someone else's behavior, you can see that this person is going through or is experiencing what we call a generational trauma. So tell me here, what is generational trauma?
Thank you very much for that question, Johannes. It's actually said that we don't know that for the longest time. Generational trauma or intergenerational trauma has been there for the longest time. I think it's the oldest dysfunction in our families. But for the longest time, we were not aware of it because language does limit our realities. When we are not having these conversations, we don't become aware of the things that are happening in our societies and families. But I can guarantee you that generational trauma has been there. It's been happening for the longest time. And one of the reasons being that we live in a fear-inflicted or fear-conscious society. Most of what we do as people is driven by fear. And when you're driven by fear, you will notice that it's very possible to succeed, but you don't have the time to genuinely sit, reflect, be mindful, and celebrate your accomplishments, because there is always a fear of a tragedy that might happen in the future. There is a fear, there is an uncertainty around your life. And this is what has been happening for the longest time. Most of our parents, from our great-grandparents, they learned to cope instead of thriving. And you can also see the same elements and the behavioral patterns in our generations today, where most of what we do is simply to cope and not to thrive. Because we are always pursuing the next big thing. We are always trying to protect ourselves from something that might possibly happen, even if we don't have enough evidence that it will happen. Yeah, and so just to answer your question, generational trauma, it is the evidence of psychological effects. And I'm not going to limit it to just psychological, because there is also spiritual to those that believe. So basically, you could say that it's the evidence of both psychological and spiritual effects of trauma being transferred from one generation to the other.
So you are saying that most of us, we live from a state of fear.
Yes.
I can relate to your statement of saying that we live from the state of fear, because there's a time where I started to realize that we live from a state of fear, and most of the thoughts that we think are influenced by fear. Thinking from the state of fear makes us to live by protecting ourselves. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying correctly. And my question is, in that state of thinking from the state of fear, what actually influences us to think from the state of fear? What is it that sparks the state of fear to be in our mind and control our mind?
Okay, what is sparking or what is triggering the state of fear to be in our minds or to be active in our minds is the conversations we are having and the experiences that we have on a day-to-day basis. And if you look at how we live our lives, because there's been a lot of abuse, like I said, generational trauma has been there for the longest time. One thing that we need to accept is that there's been abuse in our families, in our societies, and in our nations for the longest time. We can go back to slavery, we can go back to a lot of other things, even the way people used to get married. You need to understand that there was a time where women were seen as objects, and so they would be owned. When they get into a marriage, they are going to serve their husband. They were property. They belonged to their husbands. And so if you listen to most conversations that you'll hear from women, you can actually identify with trauma. When our grandparents, our grandmothers were giving advice to our mothers, they were speaking from a place of trauma. They were speaking from a place of pain and not a place of hope and healing. When they would give advice to young women about how to save a man or how to stay married, they would simply tell these women to cope, to be tolerant, and to not question a man. And so now, because of the information that we are having today, we are now becoming a generation that is awakening to a new truth and reality, where we are now realizing that we are equals regardless of color and ethnicity.
That's true.
Yes, and we need to treat each other with respect. But now, because of this new information, now we are also realizing that for the longest time, most of what we've been doing is fear. And how did we become afraid? The experiences back then, they validated, they magnified our fears. The conversations with our parents and grandparents used to have, they never spoke from a place of hope. They didn't have faith. They had more fear than they had faith. And it's because of what they were subjected to. It's because of the experiences that they went through. And that caused them then to develop that sense of fear, where you constantly live with a sense of uncertainty. You are not sure of what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know where your next meal is going to come from. You are not guaranteed that if you don't make the payment, you still own the house and the car. So if you look at everything around us today as a people, you will notice that there is always an element of you trying to protect something. Like you said, we are trying to protect ourselves. Understand? If you're driving a car and you don't make your payments, you risk losing the car. If you're living in a house, whether you're renting or you're owning it and it's on pawn, if you don't make the payment, you risk losing the house. If your kids are in school today and you miss one payment, you risk having them, return home because they have not made the payments. There is always something that is pushing you to live in a constant state of fear, because if you fail to do something, to meet a need, to meet an expectation, there is going to be repercussions. There are consequences to all our behaviors.
And you're saying that generational trauma, it's something that started, it's not new to this age. It started with our great-grandmothers, our great-grandfathers. And I'm trying to understand that right now, with the we have information right now. We live in a world where information is everywhere. You can be able to access the information that you need. And what I'm trying to understand is that, what is the difference between centuries back then, where our grandmothers experienced this generational trauma, to now? Because of right now, we can be able to speak out about it. But back in the days, it wasn't possible for one to speak about it. So what makes the difference?
I think the difference today is the availability of this information. The availability of information, and also the ability for us as a people to slowly embrace it. We need to be grateful that we are making baby steps. we are slowly embracing this truth, and we are slowly accepting that it's okay to stand up for yourself and to have these conversations and to challenge certain norms. Because one of our major setbacks as people is familiarity. Yes, we also live in this society where you have to look and think like everyone else. And that's a setback now, because when you're trying to address trauma, it means you are now thinking differently. It means you are now questioning certain norms. It means you are now stepping up for yourself and for other people. Whereas we are also in a space where when you start believing and thinking differently, you risk being disowned by your people. And so because we always want to be part of a tribe or be part of this group of people, we are tempted to also accept, certain things, even when we know deep down within ourselves that this is not right. But I'm so glad that in this generation, and I hope that in generations to come, it will be even much better. We are slowly accepting that it's okay to be misunderstood. It's okay to speak up for yourself. It's okay to choose you over an environment that threatens your safety.
And what you're saying is true, that this generation, it's awakening. This generation, it's starting to realize the truth of our the current reality of our lives, right? So my question is, so many of people, we are aware of generational trauma. We are aware that this thing, it's something that we experience on regular basis. In fact, on daily basis, it's something that we go through. We experience the pains of our past. But what makes it so difficult for people to be able to openly face generational trauma and free themselves from it?
I want to believe it's because, you see, if you look into the number of years that what we are now considering or what we have realized that is trauma has been a normal thing in our lives, it's been a longest time. And so what's making it difficult for us to stand against it today is the intensity of it. It has been normalized in a lot of places. I can give you an example of people that use alcohol, to cope or to self-medicate. You need to understand that the alcohol industry, it's in itself a business. It's an industry that is really contributing towards, taxes and the employment of a lot of people in our societies. And so imagine if we are to start a movement today against, alcohol and substance abuse. You are not just fighting against generational trauma. You are fighting against an actual business that has been set up, that is benefiting other people. So you need to understand there is also resistance within our soul communities. I can give you an example of when the lockdown started due to COVID. I think you noticed on social media how people would cry out when there were liquor rules where people were not allowed to buy liquor at certain times.
Yeah.
Or complain. You need to understand that most of these people, they self-medicate. We use these things, the alcohol, cigarettes, even prostitution. There's a lot of things that we use to cope when we are not okay, when we are avoiding the reality of our pain and trauma.
And there's something interesting you're saying right now, that the reason why many of us, we aren't able to openly face it and deal with it is because of the intensity of it.
Yes.
And the question is, how do we go about dealing with pain? Because I think pain, it's or fear, it's a bridge that we have to cross to go to the other side of freedom. In this case, I would say it's freedom. So it's myself, between myself and my freedom, it's the bridge. The bridge, it's pain. But because of the intensity of going through the bridge or going through the tunnel, it makes a lot of us to not want to attempt to do it. But the question is, how do we go about dealing with pain?
I do agree with your notion to say that pain is a bridge. I actually believe that pain for me is a defining moment, which is why I wrote the book Inspired Pain. The theme and the message in Inspired Pain is that when you recognize the patterns that are sabotaging your life or anything that you're trying to accomplish, it's much easier if you voluntarily choose to confront the discomfort and address it so that you can cross over to the other place of newness. Like you're saying, that there is freedom on the other side of your fear and pain. And this is what we also need to accept as a generation now, to understand that we are amplifying our pain by avoiding it. when we self-medicate, when we avoid the conversations, when we run away from the idea of changing our lives and choose to settle in the place of discomfort and despair. The only way to overcome this pain is to take baby steps, but we need to volunteer. You know, the most amazing thing about the human mind is that when we volunteer to go through something, it reduces the intensity, it reduces whatsoever might be a form of discomfort in that space. Because when you accept the responsibility to change your life, you are communicating to your mind and body that we must have the resources to overcome this. And the body and mind will begin to look around and identify with resources that will help you to overcome whatever it is that you are going through with less intensity and pain. But when we magnify pain, then it looks like there is no solution to it. It feels like whatever attempt we might want to make into trying to change our lives is not going to help. It's not going to change anything.
Yeah, and you're saying something quite interesting and more powerful, I would say so. Because you're saying that for us to be able to cross the bridge, which is pain, or to go through the tunnel, which is pain, to the other side of freedom, basically, you're saying that we have to take baby steps so that we can be able to slowly crawl while we're passing through the bridge and moving closer to the freedom that we desire or the freedom that we deserve. But what kind of baby steps can we take?
I think the first baby step is to look at the damage. Let's not pretend that there is no damage. Let's look at the damage and let's see it for what it is. Let's not minimize the damage or the effects of trauma. Let's look at our lives. Let's reflect. Let's take the time to ask the questions. Had we been a different people, what could have been different? Had we chosen different behaviors, what could be different today? We need to be fully present to have these conversations. Until we recognize that these behaviors are not working, we will not see the need to change them. And so the first place is we have to recognize that something is wrong. You know, if you don't have a diagnosis of what is wrong, then there is no solution. Because what do you want to solve?
Yeah, that's true.
You understand? So the most important thing is to recognize there is a problem, guys. And what is the problem? The problem is, look, we seem to be recycling patterns. We seem to be repeating our parents' failures. We seem to be living in a place where we are not, making the necessary changes in our lives. It might be financial, it might be religious, it might be raising kids, parental models, it might be marriages, it might be friendships. Let's go back to our models and ask the question, what is wrong and what is the damage?
And you're talking about behavior, something interesting again. So basically, our behavior is the one that we need to be aware of, right? So what actually clouds people from realizing their unhealthy behavior that they have learned growing up? Because I believe that, and it is actually in my book, the book I'm writing right now, the title of the book is Reshape Your Life. And I'm not yet done writing the book, but I'm almost done writing it. So I said something interesting that as children, when we grow up, we were born in a world that was created by our parents.
Yes.
How we ate, what we eat, who we become when we grow up, what we choose to do, how we show up, so how we present ourselves socially, all of these things are actually the things we are taught by our parents. And there's an interesting clip. I have a clip here with me. I want to play this clip because this clip explains better my question, and it's an interesting clip of yours on TikTok, by the way. So just take a listen to this clip. It's a 51-second clip that I saved, and I want you to walk us through this because I feel like it's an interesting thing when we talk about behavior. So here's the clip.
You learn to relate with yourself by imitating the relationships that you had with your parents, your caregivers, or any other person that you looked up to. The instinct for admiration is the same instinct for imitation. And so if you admired broken and wounded people in your childhood, it's very possible that you are relating with yourself in a very toxic way. It's very possible that you are abusing yourself now. And so before you look at everyone else and blame them for not being kind to you, maybe you need to ask yourself the question, how is my relationship with myself? What is it that I am doing that is creating for situations that allow for other people to come into my space and take advantage of me? How do you relate with yourself?
So this clip explains better the question of saying that what actually clouds us from realizing the unhealthy behavior that we have learned. Because of in this clip, you explaining it more better. It's just that this was a 51-second clip. So now I want you to dive deep into it to say we relate with ourselves based on the things that we have accumulated or the knowledge that we have accumulated that was installed in our mind by our parents, by our caregivers, by the people we grew up with.
True, that's very true, and thank you very much for saying that. When we are kids, or when we were kids, those were our developmental stages, and the most closest people to us were our caregivers or parents. And the way these people treated us or related with us determined who we became, because they contributed towards our formative years. And so you notice that most of what you think to be true about yourself, you took it from your parents. You took it from the relationships you had with either your parents, your caregivers, or the people that you considered role models back then. And so the way you are relating with yourself today is simply a reflection of what you believed to be true as a result of your relationships with those people. The people that are in our midst as kids, the elders, they have so much power over our minds and our behaviors as we notice them, as we mimic their behaviors. And unfortunately, in a broken home, you don't have the right blueprint or the right model of life. And so you are tempted, or the most convenient thing is to simply learn from either your mom or your dad. And so you can imagine if you are learning from a broken adult, someone who doesn't know how to show up for themselves, someone who doesn't understand their emotional structure. They have no idea who they are as a person. They are not available to understand their nervous system and their body. There is no rhythm in their life. And this is the same person that you are looking at and you are saying, this is my father. And remember, we all need to impress our parents. We live in a state where we feel we owe it to our parents to do something to make them proud. And when they are living their life and we are seeing them, we feel as if we can do something that they are doing, then maybe they will like us better. Because when you live in a broken home, there is no love, there is no receptiveness, there is no connectedness. And because the human psyche thrives on connections, you want to belong, you want to be connected to your parents, to your caregivers, to your siblings. And so the temptation is to identify with something that your parents like so that you can do it with them, or so that you can do it for them. This is where now most kids become parents when they are younger, because now they are becoming emotionally responsible for their parents' emotional state. You learn to impress your parents as a child. You learn to satisfy your parents as a kid by way of making sure that they are happy, by choosing the behaviors that make them happy. But the question is, when I choose the behaviors that are making my parents happy, are they healthy? And the way to answer that is you need to then look at your parents or caregivers and ask the question, were they healthy? The things they did, were they healthy? Were they normal? Now that I am aware of this new knowledge and information regarding mental health and being the kind person, being a conscious individual, as I reflect on my parents, were they healthy? Can I say that that was a safe home to live in? And be very honest as you reflect on those questions.
And there's something quite important. I'm saying it's quite important because it's actually from the statement that you just posed right now, is that as children growing up, you grow up under the shadow of parents who are living an unhealthy lifestyle. They are not good role models to you.
Yeah.
And this is important because a lot of teenagers right now, a lot of young people right now, some of them as we speak, they are pregnant. Some of them, they already have babies. They are parents to their children. And then the question is, now that we have observed how living under the shadow of an unhealthy parent someone who doesn't know how to be a good role model. So the real question here is that, what is the parental advice for anyone who is parenting or who is about to be a parent? Because as teenagers, most of us, we are so broken. We are so broken beyond repair. Some of us, we cannot be able to repair ourselves. But for the sake of our children right now as young people, for the sake of the children we are about to give birth to, what is actually the parental advice you have for parents?
Okay, maybe before I talk about the parental advice that I might have, I just need to clarify something, because as we talk about these conversations or about these things, I'm realizing that there is also resistance from people, because, we were raised in a system that does not allow us to question our parents.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's very difficult for a lot of people to then find themselves saying, I am not happy because I feel I was raised by a narcissistic parent, or because I feel I was raised by a very abusive and controlling parent. And so when we talk about confronting behaviors, I need for people to understand that we are not really confronting our parents. We are not judging our parents. We are confronting the behaviors that we no longer want in our society today. And so we need to also exercise a lot of grace and patience, because whatever our parents offered us back then, it was also due to the knowledge and awareness they had. They were also limited in some way. They had to do what they had to do in that space to survive.
Yeah.
And so we are not coming here to throw stones at them. We are not blaming them, but rather we are saying, now that we have realized that there is something wrong, please give us space to change these things without you taking offense from the things that we are trying to change. We are not attacking you as parents, because remember, some of us are already parents. I am a parent myself, and I have accepted that there are certain things that my kids will need to attend therapy for, because I have to accept that I am not giving them the best. My best might not be their best, and it's okay. And as and when they begin to attend therapy, or as and when they begin to question certain things regarding my parental model, I should not take offense from that. That's something that we need to understand. And then the parental advice that I would give to people is, I need for people to take advantage of the resources like your podcast. This Unpack Show, believe me, it's really filled with wisdom and love. This is a place of hope. We need to be a parent that are curious. We need to be a generation that is learning to be very curious. Let's take advantage of the resources. Let's be attentive and supportive of our kids. Let's be receptive of our kids. Let's not be judgmental. And let's accept that we are raising individuals. You might have 3 kids, but you are not raising a group of kids. You are raising individuals. Treat them differently, based and according to their needs.
This is mind-blowing. You may be raising 3 kids, but you are not raising a group of kids. You are raising individuals.
Individuals. The mistake that we make is to assume that if I have 4 kids, then I'm raising a bunch of kids. No. You need to understand that each child is an adult that is being prepared. And our differences are unique. And so these differences need to be accepted whilst they are still young.
And with raising, it's mind-blowing what you just said. You are not raising a bunch of kids, but you are raising individuals. It's something that I myself, I didn't know it. I didn't know it, because growing up, I think it's something that, it's a knowledge that many of parents lack. When growing up, the parents treat us the same. They give us the same thing. And you're mentioning something important, that we have different needs, different desires as kids, but you'd find that parents are imposing kids to do the same thing together. Each and everything that you do it to each and every kid. You give one thing to each and every kid. It's like one size fits all. And according to what you're saying, it's one size fits all doesn't work in raising kids. So how take me through the step by step, or walk me through understanding how can a parent be able to raise their kids individually by having to give an attention and focus to each and every individual child, even though there are 4, 5, 3, or any number that a parent or guardian might be raising of children. But how are they able to give their attention to each and every child, but making sure that they accommodate all of them? Take us through step by step in that.
I usually like to say this to parents. If one child is studying to be a doctor, then they need to attend, medicine lectures. They don't go to engineering lectures. They identify with the right classes so that they are able to write the exam. They cannot sit for a final exam without attending the right lectures during the year. It's the same thing with parenting. Number one, identify with the goal. Understand your child. Understand your child independently as an individual. What is my child pursuing? Who can they become? Who are they going to become? And when you know who your child is growing to become, then you are able to identify with the resources. And remember, you are not going to give equal time to all your kids, and it's okay, because their demands or their needs are different. They are unique. Like you said, our parents treat us the same way. They greet us the same way. They think they should give us the same amount of energy and time. It's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true. Sometimes you spend more time with the other child because maybe they are struggling with something. And sometimes you spend more time with the other child because maybe they are just growing in a different way. It's not to say you don't love the other kids. But the best way to love these kids and to give them, equal opportunities and not equal time is to know them differently. And when you understand them differently, you will notice that they are not even bothered by how much time you're spending with the other kid, because when you are with them, you give them everything. You attend to their needs. You are aware of the energy they need and the resources they need, and you make that available for them.
And like you just said something interesting. You say that it's not about the amount of time you spend with them, but it's about the amount of energy you give when you are present with them. Let's talk a little bit about self-care, because I have learned that you need to take care of yourself, and if you take a good care of yourself and you are healthy, you are a healthy person mentally, emotionally, or would say spiritually and physically, you can be able to actually attend to a person and offer something that is of value, or offer your attention will actually be of value. So tell me a little bit about self-care. How does it have to do with parenting?
That's a very interesting and yet an important conversation around parenting. It's difficult for parents to attend to their kids if they are not attending to themselves. And sometimes we are overwhelmed by the responsibilities of parenting and other responsibilities out there, because remember, outside of being a mom or a dad, you also need to work, you need to provide, and there are other responsibilities. Chances are, especially in our societies today, chances are you're also taking care of an extended family. And so by so doing, we tend to neglect ourselves. And unfortunately, when we neglect ourselves and we then go to our kids and we try to be there for them, we are pouring from an empty cup, because we don't have self-love, we don't have self-respect, we don't have self-preservation, we don't know how to take care of ourselves. And so even the conversations we have with kids, this is why you notice that we easily get agitated, we are overwhelmed, and we become resentful when we feel that our kids are not appreciative of our efforts. It's because we are giving from an empty cup. As a parent, you have a responsibility to show up for yourself just as much as you're trying to show up for other people. And I usually tell people, I say this to people, you see, I think the mistake that we make is we think that we have a different cup or a different source for resources that are meant for self-care. What people need to understand is the resources that we have for other people, the energy that we have to offer to other people, the time that we offer other people, the conversations we offer other people, that space that we take, that emotional space that we go and we take those resources, it's the same emotional space that carries the emotional resources that we need for ourselves. And so as we take from that place, we also need to watch how much is left. Your emotional state is like your gauge in your car. If you ignore your fuel gauge, believe me, at some point you're going to get stuck. If you enjoy revving and traveling at high speeds without watching the fuel gauge, at some point you get stuck. And so if you're constantly giving out and yet you're not taking the time to refuel, to unwind, to recollect your thoughts, to reflect on certain things, eventually you run out. This is the challenge for a lot of parents. We are giving from an empty cup.
And this brings me to the next interesting question, to say that we're talking about the brokenness inside, the trauma, the past pains that we have experienced. And I often say that relationships are the most beautiful thing, they make our human nature to be amazing. So with a lot of us being so broken, the question is, how can we navigate ourselves in a relationship so that we don't destroy ourselves and the people we are in a relationship with? Because sometimes the things that we go through, they end up affecting the next person, your partner, the person you live with. In any form of relationship, it can be a friendship, it can be a relationship with your spouse or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, a family relationship. So how do we navigate ourselves in a relationship so that we don't end up destroying ourselves and the people we are in a relationship with?
I believe that the first place is to accept thyself. Accept yourself. If you know that there are issues that needs to be addressed, address them by way of therapy or identifying with people that can help you. In 2022, we need to be people that are deliberate, intentional in the things that we do. Identify with a support system. Attend therapy if you can afford it. Accept the differences in your relationships. People don't understand that our differences are unique. They are necessary. They are a part of our relationships. Because if I could do everything for myself, I wouldn't need my partner. Where the differences come in. Our differences are an opportunity to serve one another, but only when we have accepted them. You understand? You notice right now I'm having a conversation with you. Do you know why we are having this conversation? It's because you have accepted our differences and you're asking questions and I'm responding. There is also a place where I will need to ask you questions and you respond, because there is something that you know that I don't know.
Yeah,
and so we accept our differences. We connect. Because we recognize that this person has value. There is an area where they are equipped to help me. When we are in relationships, we are not competing. We are there to grow together, to evolve together, to become better together. And the second thing is we need to be kind. Be kind to yourself and be kind to your partner. To be kind means to be present, to realize that you're going to need to be patient with your partner. Because you know what? We are growing every day. Let's make room for growth every day. Let's not live in the past. Let's not hold on to past experiences without creating room for new experiences.
Wow, this is so true. I love the fact that you say that we constantly need to consult, because of in consulting, you are opening up yourself to saying, this is who I am, and I need to actually dive deep into myself and know what are the things that I need to actually attack, or what are the things that I need to fix, so that you don't actually have to destroy someone else. And this is something that I actually saw the need for, which is consultation, to say we are people. We come from different worlds. When you meet with a woman, she's coming from her own world, you are coming from your own world, but you are coming together, joining forces to build one life together. So the only way, and this is from my perspective, the only way for two people coming from different worlds to be able to build a life together, it's by going to relationship therapists to try to understand each other's world and know how can we be able to build one world that we can live into with different perspectives that we come from. And I love that. So Now, if one finds him or herself in a relationship with a broken person, what is the best way to deal with that person?
Okay. You see, I think one of the other things that we need to understand is when we are in relationships with people, we don't own people. Let's not seek to own the other person. Let's seek to love and connect. When you find yourself with a broken person, it's difficult to understand them until you know their world. When you meet a broken person, you don't ask the question, what is wrong with you? The most important question is, what happened to you?
Wow.
We need to know people. However, there is only so much that you can offer to someone until they also decide to address their brokenness. But the most important question is, what happened to you? When you ask that question, you open up yourself to a new conversation that can help you understand what people have been through or what your partner has been through without judgment.
So this is a matter of understanding the language you use when you communicate.
Yes, and that's why they are love languages. Communication, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, conversations are very important, and to learn conversational skills is very important in our relationships. Because sometimes we want to ask the right questions, but the way we ask them is so offensive to the other person that they end up not opening up to us. And so we need to learn to start asking the right questions and understanding that language matters.
This is so true. This is so true.
When you find yourself with a broken person, don't ask the question, what's wrong? No, you're going to ask, what happened? What happened? Allow them to tell you what they have been through. And then when you found out what happened, it's also important to realize that you might not have the help, you might not be able to offer the help they need. And so you can only support by way of identifying with resources or people or a place where they might find the help they need. Being with a broken person or being with an unstable person doesn't necessarily mean that you become their therapist or that you assume the role of a savior. You simply identify with ways of helping them grow. And sometimes it means just showing up with them for therapy and not you trying to be their therapist. Because remember, you might not be equipped to help in that way. But by just being there with them and for them, it might be the greatest form of help that you're offering them. Don't try to be a hero in people's lives.
Wow. This is so true. And, you know, as individually, I would say probably individually or as couples. And I'm saying I'm posing this question because of like there are people who are not yet in relationships and there are people who are already committed to their partners in relationships. So both individual people or couples who found themselves committed in a relationship, how do we go about freeing ourselves from generational trauma?
I think one of the greatest resources we have today is therapy. We need to start attending therapy. People think that when we talk about things in the salon or at the barber shop, we have addressed everything. Yes, we might be able to, pick a few words of enlightenment and wisdom, but believe me, sometimes you need to do the actual work, and sometimes that means attending therapy. We need to address the stigma around therapy. Let's not shun away from going or attending therapy. And unfortunately, we live in a society that thinks that attending therapy is for the weak. But if you ask me, it takes a brave individual to attend therapy. Therapy is for the brave. And then the second thing is, let's change our conversations. You see, there is a video that I stitched on TikTok of a guy who was talking about the toxic masculinity, about the things that men can do and that women cannot do, especially when you're a successful man. Those are some of the conversations we need to confront. When I did that video, I was not attacking the guy, but I was addressing the mentality. There are conversations that we need to change if our lives are going to change.
I saw that video. I saw it.
Yes, we need to start addressing conversations. It's important that we recognize that certain conversations are fueling toxic behaviors.
And you're saying something interesting. And I think it's something important. our culture, and it comes from your statement right now that we live in a culture that is not open to therapists, to consulting. And the question is, what went wrong with the culture to not be able to be open or to consult with therapists? Because we are different than the Western culture. I mean, our African culture, it's different from the Western culture, and most of African culture, and we like the Western culture of knowing how to deal with problems. And I think if we like their culture, then why not implement it in our own culture? So the question is, what went wrong with our society to not be able to open ourselves to therapy?
Okay, and I'm going to say something that might be maybe different from what you said. I genuinely believe that there was actually a time where people in our culture used to consult. We might not have had the terms therapist and psychologist back then, but I want to believe there was a time when we used to have elders in our societies. There were men and women who would be consulted regarding important issues. But unfortunately, as we grew and as we began to travel, I think there was that disconnection from certain elements of our cultures that were serving, towards healthy states or normal communities. And so we abandoned them, we neglected them, to a point where today, if you find men sitting with the elderly and asking for advice, we have a generation of young men that will look at you and laugh at you and judge you to say, what do you think you will learn from this old man or old woman? One of the mistakes that we have made as a generation is to think and believe that to be independent means to abandon everything. And that's not true. There are certain parts and elements of our cultures that we need to preserve because they worked back then. They did serve a purpose. And so as we move towards, the new age where we are now going to therapists, we need to remember that they used to be therapists even though they didn't have the title therapist. Because they were men that our fathers would go to and consult. They were there, they would sit. You know how today we have young men sitting and having their alcohol and just talking about everything else. There was a time when the elderly would sit and really discuss important issues where there is enough needs, enough. There was enough just, food for the people available, and issues would be discussed. By the time you leave that space, you are not just satisfied by the food, but you are satisfied and empowered by the conversations. We want to be a generation that begin to build certain truths and aspects of our cultures that were destroyed by our idea of independence.
So your statement of answering the question that I had of how do we go about freeing ourselves from generational trauma, it's starting to consult with therapists, unpacking the issues that we actually went through growing up. And I love what you're saying, that when you say that our generation, it's starting to wake up, it's starting to see the importance of actually consulting to deal with their past problems. Because when I see your videos, sometimes I go to the comments and look at the comments, and I would see so many people saying that I think now it's time to start opening up myself and dealing with my own issues. A lot of comments that makes me to see to share the same sentiment with you, of saying that now a lot of people are starting to see the importance of dealing with their pains, given the challenges that we go through daily in our lives.
True that, and I'm glad that we are becoming that generation, because if we can pass on that same idea to our kids, that it's okay to open up, it's okay to look for help, it's okay to be vulnerable. I think the right word is, let's embrace vulnerability.
That's powerful.
Let's embrace vulnerability. We can no longer run away from our shortcomings. We can no longer pretend as if we are not weak, because there are moments when we are weak and we need the support of other people.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Well, Chris, it has been an honor to have to sit down with you and share this moment together, where you walk us through the journey of understanding and unpacking the issue of generational trauma. I so much enjoyed it. I so much enjoyed it because of like, ever since I sent you an invitation, we talked through the phone call, we texted, like I was so much looking forward to this day, and fortunately we had this moment. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you having me here. Believe me, I was also anxious, but I was also looking forward to it. You know, it's really good because I think I feel more alive when I have these conversations, because it's my desire to let the world know. It's my desire to help the next guy. I believe that conversations change lives.
Thank you so much for that. And one more last question. This is a game changer question. Each and every guest we have on the Unpack Show, I ask this question because I believe that as visionaries, we have that desire to change and shape our world to be a better place to be. So the game changer question is, if given an opportunity to make the world a better place to be, what would you do?
I personally believe that I would let go of the idea of ownership. If I am to encourage people today to change one thing, I would ask them to stop owning things, the idea of ownership.
Oh.
The reason why we are not satisfied as people is because we want to own everything. The reason why we fight in our marriages, the reason why we struggle to connect at work is because there is that element of ownership. But there is always that one person that thinks they are better than everyone else and that they are entitled. Ownership gives a wrong sense of entitlement. It's a very toxic sense of entitlement, where you think that maybe you need to be treated better because of what you think you own that other people don't have.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. So before you leave, I think there are so many people who would appreciate to engage with you even outside of this conversation, maybe individually or as couples, or every person wherever they are in this world listening to this conversation. They would so much like to follow you and carry on enjoying your work and the wisdom that you share on a daily basis. Where can people find you?
I think I'm all over social media, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. My books are on Amazon, so you can buy them on Amazon. But if you're in South Africa, I am also self-distributing, so you can buy them directly from me. And my Twitter, my Instagram, my TikTok handle is You Grow Become. You Grow Become. My name is Chambiwa. You can also find me on Facebook. And yes, and my contact number, if there are people that might want to give me a call, because I am available for individual, couples, and group counseling and coaching. My number is 063-144-6691.
Chris, it has been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this time.
Thank you for joining the podcast. If you would like a comment to be recorded on the podcast, send it to our WhatsApp number 061 453 0960. 061 453 0960.